our Flagstaff community and to our broader Arizona community, to our national community and to our international community. We are excited to have you joining us again this evening for a hot topic conversation on race, space, and segregation, the continued legacy of the city's broken promises to the South Side. We are excited to be bringing you this session that will look at the history of race, space, and segregation. It will look at some of the history of the South Side community and the city's engagement with the South Side. We'll have a conversation about the state of the South Side right now and some of the modern issues that are impacting this particular community, and talk about what it means in context of the South Side and the broader Flagstaff community. I'm excited to have several guests with us this evening. And we're going to go ahead and launch right in with a presentation from Dr. Ricardo Guthrie. Dr. Guthrie will be speaking to us about race, space, and modern day segregation, framing the issue. He is an associate professor of ethnic studies, former director of the program, and a 13-year resident of Flagstaff, Deneta. A national contributor to African diaspora arts and culture for more than 4 decades, he examines political narratives of the Black press and writes about cinema as cultural political artifacts. He was lead artist and designer of the Historic Southside Mural at the Murdoch Community Center and is currently researching the life of Dr. Carlton B. Goodlett and the San Francisco Sun Reporter. Welcome, Dr. Guthrie.
All right, thank you very much. I'm really pleased to present today. I'm going to click on my slideshow. And this is the short version of what we previously talked about at the Live Black Experience Town Hall in October. So I've tried to update it a little bit, which was part of our delay. Okay, so the Live Black Experience in the south side of Flagstaff. As we know, this is south of Route 66, or south of the railroads, where many Blacks, Hispanics, and Native Americans were segregated for most of the first part of the 20th century, from the 1920s up through 1954. And of course, the community continues as being largely Black, Hispanic, and Native American, even to today. So the Live Black Experience in the south side of Flagstaff is the story of how these people who were segregated turned that segregation into congregation. And what that means is they took a negative and turned it into a positive. And Flagstaff has a documented history of this redlining. What's the redlining? That meant that if you were south of the tracks, you lived in an area that was underdeveloped. There were no sidewalks, limited drainage, parking, driving, etc. And as the rest of the town grew, Southside would eventually benefit, but it would take time and determination by the Black, Hispanic, and Native American populations who were brought here to work in the lumber mills and in the hospitals and in the recreation centers and in the restaurants. There was a lively entertainment district south of the railroad tracks. And so Southside was very famous for the musicians and the workers and the lived culture that was there. And it was primarily, as I said, Black, Latino, and Native American. So taking this documented history, if you're redline, they draw a line around your housing and your work area. And so if you went for a loan, you would most likely be denied. Why? Not because you didn't have enough money or a good job. There are very good jobs here working for the lumber mill. The reason that you would be denied a loan is because you're in the area that is deemed red. They had a color code system for more desirable neighborhoods. Red was the worst. Green was the best. And so in between there was yellow and orange. Okay. So in the redlined areas, you could not get the loan that you might need to build your house. Why is that? They said not only because of the racial distinction, there were more Blacks, Latinos, and Native Americans there than whites north of Route 66, but also you were in a floodplain. So it was more expensive and more dangerous for the banks to loan to you because you might have your investments wiped out by a 100-year flood. Now, that doesn't mean that the flood only came every 100 years. It just meant there was a danger for doing that. South of Route 66, south of the railroad tracks. And so the Blacks and Latinos and the Native Americans who lived there would turn, because they cast off lumber into building a home. And so those homes also were hard to invest in because they were not necessarily up to code. So for many years, a lot of the housing in the south side of Flagstaff was not up to code, was not financed by the banks, and was generally in a dangerous situation because it was in an official floodplain. And we'll talk a little bit later when we talk with Mr. Soto and with Ms. Deb Harris about what it means to live in a floodplain. Again, doesn't mean the flood was always there. It just meant when the danger was there, you could lose everything and not be reimbursed. Okay. So this is a pattern of segregation. It doesn't mean that you just wanted to live by yourself. It meant that the city itself would not provide enough services for that community. So Blacks were living there and working for the railroads. Hispanics were working there and being lumberjacks and working in the restaurants and recreation business. Same thing with the Native Americans. And yes, there were some whites who were south of Route 66, but largely, mostly a Black and Latino and Native American community. So as the growth and development of the city occurred during this time of racial exclusion and segregation during most of the 20th century, it was still a very lively part of town. Blacks were still having a good life, if you will, because they had escaped the South, Louisiana, Mississippi, Texas, Alabama. Many of the Blacks who came to Flagstaff settled from those deep Southern towns. And so there was a type of Jim Crow here, but it was not as bad as being in Mississippi or Louisiana or elsewhere. This is the truth that we're trying to say here. So if you escape the South on your way to California, most Blacks stayed here because the jobs were plentiful, and it was very similar to what they might have done in Louisiana, Texas, Alabama, and some of the other southern towns. Yes, there was even cotton that was grown in Arizona that Black folks were imported to pick. And we'll talk about that another time. But in Flagstaff, it was lumber. In Flagstaff, it was entertainment. In Flagstaff, it was the restaurants and the other parts of the city. I think Mayor Corral used to talk about it actually being a red light district on South San Francisco. This is part of the story that we tell. Some of the houses of ill repute were there on the South Side. Why was that? Because that was a way to contain it. It was a way to contain the type of underground economy that thrived in almost every major city where Black folks didn't have equality. So they were in the underground economy. Returning to what was happening in the South Side, Black cultural and historical structures were quite prominent. There were 4 Black churches, 2 Hispanic Latino churches, famous story about Our Lady of Guadalupe being built because the Catholic diocese was discriminating against Mexican Americans, Hispanos, and Latinos. They said you could come in the church, you could serve Jesus, but your pew is in the back, if you had a pew at all. And the Mexicanos said, enough of this, we will build our own church. And so that little church over there, Our Lady of Guadalupe, was built hand by hand by many of the Mexicanos who sold tamales, who had jamaicas, who had parties and festivals in order to raise money. And they built that church rock by rock. And you could say the same for the 4 Black churches that are all within a 1-mile area near the Murdoch Center. It was built off of the ingenuity of those people who had been transplanted from the South. So the Flagstaff demographics, where people are and who are there, still represents growing segments of Native American, Latinx, as we say now, Asian and African Americans who are still largely segregated between the North and the South. Many of us who worked at the university or the medical center, the private sector, or the entertainment or hospitality industries, we still feel the stigma of being here based on the jobs that we do for the city that are not adequately compensated, And it's not just a geographic thing anymore. Okay, so this history of segregation is a thematic construct that we have to look at in a historical time frame. And what that means is, even though the built environment of Flagstaff has grown from 5,000 right before World War II to 15,000 right after World War II to 25, 50, and 75 during the 50s, 60s, and 1980s, until we're now at about 70,000 people. Most of those jobs and most of those people are connected to the industries like university, hospitals, and the restaurant and hospitality industry. But we're still a very small city that is still very much segregated. There are limited housing and cultural opportunities, as most people already know, but it is especially felt within the South Side. Fewer opportunities for housing, working, going to school. In fact, Flagstaff Southside does not have parks, and we'll talk a little bit about what that means. So the civic engagement in Southside has become limited because all of the schools that used to be there, the Dunbar School and the South Beaver School, have been closed down. And the opportunities to work have been restricted to most of that that segment there on South San Francisco Street. Not a bad opportunity, don't get me wrong. There were many opportunities to own your business, run your restaurant, or your clothing store, or your bar on the South Side, but it's become more limited over time. So this continuing legacy that we're talking about affects the built environment as well as the philosophical environment of what it means to be on the South Side. Those churches still exist. Our Lady of Guadalupe still exists. So do the 4 Black churches, but they're very small, declining populations, and they no longer serve the same purpose that they did, let's say, in the middle of segregation. As you know, the Catholic diocese built a nice, beautiful church up on the hill, and they closed down most of the dioceses that were outside of that hill, including Our Lady of Guadalupe. It still functions as a cultural center, but not the way it did before. So in this small mountain town, what we want to think about is embracing the history and the legacy of turning segregation into congregation and advancing the life benefit of everybody who came through that area, including Blacks, Latinos, Native Americans, and whites. So the positive part of this, if you will, story of segregation is that people were forced to work together with each other. They were forced to try to share resources, and actually turned out to be the more integrated part of the city, because everybody could come South Side. Everybody who could afford to live there lived there, but it didn't work the other way. Secondly, the growth and development within the area we called South Side, also very limited. The type of housing that is there is, for the most part, hard to maintain. Let's say it's in need of renovation, but the renovation is slowed down because the banks were not lending to homeowners to improve their homes, and the flood designation of the South Side also restricted what you could do. The growth and development within this area then was very much constricted by race, by space, and by active discrimination, if you will. The part 3 of this discussion that we want to talk about is the impact of the river, what we call the Rio de Flag. Now, you know, that's a nice storm channel that comes all the way out from the mountain. And for the most part, it's rather benign, meaning that when it rains, it does overflow, but for the most part, the rain runs through that channel safely for most of the city, except for the South Side, which has had periods of flooding throughout its history. So there's a major project now to relocate the Rio de Flag and to bring to people a type of control and self-determination over their homes. So when the Rio de Flag is relocated so that it's no longer a storm drain that empties into the South Side, there'll be more displacement of water in other parts of the city, The historical part that I'll just touch on briefly was that the city fathers had decided to relocate the Rio de Flag so that it no longer flooded the north and the south, but had a greater impact on the south. That was done on purpose in the early part of the 20th century. And it was done on purpose because the south side was not as developed as the downtown. Okay, so you can say it was a very benign thing at the first part, but then you started to populate the south side so that those people were living in a floodplain that was more prone to displacement, dislocation, and discrimination. That's the facts. That's how it works. I'm not saying people automatically thought about how they're going to ruin people's lives south of that's not what happened. It was deemed to be a good idea to stop the downtown area from flooding, right? Who wouldn't want that? But then there were fewer people who lived on the south side of the tracks. And when it became more congregated and more dense because blacks could not live north of the tracks, then you had a problem. Then segregation turned into a discrimination venue. So looking ahead, Rio de Flag project to be relocated, that means we'll have a new development core south of the tracks, and maybe the south side can catch up to the north side. This is a win-win situation, right? So that comes into number 4, neighborhood empowerment. What happens when you change the dynamics of a floodplain? It means that the property values will increase. It means that your home, which was previously a ramshackle house that was in need of renovation, now becomes a veritable gold mine, a gold mine. If you're able to then invest and change the built environment so that it's better for you. But most people don't have the type of money and the type of investment to turn their home into a castle. And so there's a market value there that's pressuring people in the coming years to sell their homes because the land themselves is very, very valuable. Neighborhood empowerment would say, we'll develop a plan so we're not going to displace all the people that you see, the Shirley Sims, the Reverend Sims, or the offspring of Joan Dorsey there on the left, that people who have invested in this part of the town can stay and make good on that promise. That's what neighborhood empowerment would do. That's why the city created a South Side neighborhood plan and a Plaza Vieja neighborhood plan and an overall city plan so that nobody would be left out. That was the plan that we endorsed. And actually it's an award-winning plan, right? A local plan that won a national award as well as international award. Not because it talked about the monopoly board of housing and jobs, but because it included residents in the description of what it means to live in a community. And they went around and interviewed people. They brought together stakeholders. They had 2 years worth of planning workshops so that by the time that 2 years was up, right in the middle of COVID, there was actually a pretty dynamic plan that was one of the award-winning development plans in the entire nation, and it became a model for the entire world. Okay, I'm almost through to number 4 and number 5. I want to talk about the city and NAU and the resource allocation. As you know, what we've talked about in previous town halls of the Live Black experience, there's a kind of a tension, if you will, between the South Side as a neighborhood and the rest of the city. Why is that? It's because it is a very valuable location, valuable because of the people, as well as to the resources that have been developed in the South Side. It is very true that Flagstaff is the way it is now because of the people who have been in the South Side. I'm not saying other areas were not important, but I am saying South Side exists because it brought in a very valuable workforce, a very strong cultural dynamic from 3 separate groups, and because they were concentrated in the South Side, they had a greater impact on the lives that were happening there. And people loved it. They would come, as I said, to South San Francisco Street to enjoy the best music, the best food, the best let's say liquor, and other underground economies that you couldn't get in the rest of the city. And part of the story that we like to tell is that the neighborhood policing itself was set up in a way so that people could direct their different behaviors south of the tracks, for good and for bad reasons. Let's talk about that. So in the city of Flagstaff, we know that NAU is growing, has been growing, and that even COVID put the brakes on it. There's still the plan that NAU would continue to grow and exceed its 25 to 30,000 student footprint. This is part of the plan within NAU, and it still hasn't changed, even though COVID put the brakes on it. So you have that pressure. Then you have the pressure of the Southside Rio de Flag relocation, which should happen in the next 5 to 10 years. And during that time, there will be a built environment that will undergo dramatic changes. We've already seen the changes in a growing population that is older. Again, it's more retired or residential. There are fewer homes that can be bought and purchased within Southside, and it's largely rent impacted because of NAU's growth. Lots of homes for kids and students, fewer homes for older folks and professionals like myself and Miss Deb, who would like to live in the South Side. It's very hard to do that. And yet and still, within this area, within the city of Flagstaff, the low-income populations and concentrations in the South Side neighborhoods are less than that in Sunnyside and the rest of the city. And I'll give you a few statistics so I can close out here. In the South Side, 81% of the populations are in low to moderate income. That means in 1990s terms, it was about $11,000 per year compared to the rest of the city, which was twice that, 28,000. Now, these seem like small numbers. They're increased now in the 2020s, of course, but back then, when the last time it was measured, it showed that it was basically 50% of the rest of the city. The same with the median house values in the South Side were depressed because of the floodplain. Those prices will be jacked up to meet the rest of the city in a matter of years. The population of Southside is smaller, yes, but the number of households is less than the rest of the city, but it will increase. I think Sunnyside, by comparison, has about 1,500 households. Population of Sunnyside is about 6,000, maybe 7,000. You'll have to ask Mayor Coral about that. I have old statistics, whereas in Southside, it's less than 3,000. Okay. I'll try to wrap up now and save more time. The main thing that we wanted to get to you today when we talk about race, space, and segregation, what we have found is the space itself, the space that we talk about in terms of where we live in the South Side, is impacted by these social, economic, and political considerations, because it's not just a poor part of the town, but a part of the town that was very rich in terms of culture, labor, and experience. That's still true, but it is also the most racially diverse part of the city. More Blacks, more Latinos, more Hispanic or Native Americans still reside in the South Side, and of course NAU does too. So when we consider what are the questions or the concerns that we should have here, what does it mean to have a racial or ethnic community but no civic space? A civic space is where you come to work, live, play. I think we work there. A lot of folks don't really live there. Some who live there are retired, and we don't really have the type of civic space or even parks that you could experience. The plan has them, but right now we don't. Number two, what does it mean then to be told, wait 10 years to develop the reality of this civic space? What does it mean when the plan itself was put forward in September and October to be implemented in this next fiscal year? But now we're getting some news that maybe we're going to have to delay on that, maybe 10 years before we could fully implement it. What does that mean? And who would make that decision? The third question I want to ask for you, what does it mean to continuously have other needs put forward that might impact the South Side when we have a whole neighborhood plan that is ready to go, which has been put aside? South Side has a plan, Plaza Vieja has a plan, and they're part of the major part of the city rebuilding itself. Anybody who's driven up and down Butler can see what is needed compared to the rest of the city. It is underdeveloped compared to the rest of the city. But we have to ask, what does it mean then if the needs of those people who live along that corridor, Butler, South San Francisco, Wilson Riles Street, I'm so proud to say that, what does it mean to live on those streets now and to have your needs delayed? And some people say up to 5 or 10 years. And lastly, what does it mean then for a neighborhood to have spent all this time developing a plan for itself to live Black experience and others, to be a model for the nation and for the world? What does it mean to take that plan and to put it on hold? All right, this is the first time a project of this magnitude has been developed for Southside. So don't get me wrong, the city is right in trying to do what it can to relocate the Rio de Flag and to deal with the flooding. It's a correct billion-dollar project that has to go forward. But guess what? We have some pretty billion-dollar ideas about how to better do that and how to turn segregation into congregation, but we're being left out of the picture, I think. And I think tonight's discussion, I'm hoping, will provide more of the history and the culture as seen through the Mr. Soto and his son and through Miss Deb and this conversation that we need to have. I'll stop there. I just stayed on this one slide because I thought maybe we can just have a conversation going forward. But if you need the other slides that have the statistics, just let me know, Sister Khara, and I can call those up so we're not holding up the show. Okay?
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much.
All right.
Thank you so much, Dr. Guthrie, for that introduction, the background, the statistics, and all of that invaluable information for this conversation.
Thank you.
We're going to now invite our other panelists forward to launch into a conversation that looks at the modern situation and how the Southside Plan came to be, what's happening now within the Southside community, and what it means to address some of Dr. Guthrie's questions, to put those plans on hold, and to ask a community like the Southside to continue to wait for some of this engagement. We have joining us tonight Ms. Deborah Harris, who has 35 years of higher education experience, having retired from service at Northern Arizona University in 2017. Ms. Harris serves as the Executive Director and President of the Southside Community Association. She has also served as a board member of United Way of Northern Arizona, the Coconino County African Diaspora Advisory Council, for which she also previously served as chair, as a board member and former president of the Flagstaff Unified School District, a member of the Arizona Governor's Commission on African American Affairs, and president of Sigma Gamma Rho Sorority Incorporated, Kappa Sigma Sigma Flagstaff Alumni Chapter. We also have joining us this evening Mr. Ramon Soto and Mr. David Soto. They are the son and grandson of Spanish sheep herder immigrants in Flagstaff who settled in the South Side and promoted minority rights for land ownership, including the land sale to the First Missionary Baptist Church in the South Side. Ramon Soto is a lifelong resident and advocate of the South Side. He attended South Beaver School and Flagstaff High, along with his brothers and sisters. His children and some grandchildren are also following this path through high school. Ramon was a contract administrator for state and federal highway projects, including the realignment of Milton. Mr. Soto is well versed in and fought to protect the minority rights for the South Side. David Soto is the general partner and chief investment strategy officer for Azalera Capital. He also serves on the board of Astoria Ventures, a family investment office focused on promoting minority businesses with social impact on sustainability. And we will also welcome back Dr. Guthrie for this conversation as well. Ms. Deb, as we prepare to launch into this conversation, first of all, thank you for joining us this evening. You've served in the background of these conversations for a long time. And I'm hoping that tonight you can start us off by telling us how and why this matters now. What is happening in the South Side now that reflects these issues, and what does the community need to know about what's happening right now?
Okay. Thank you, Khara, and the Live Black Experience Dialogues for inviting me. And you're right, I tend to be in the background for most of these conversations. But this, the incident or the situation that's happening now really, is pushing me to the forefront to talk about this issue. And so Dr. Guthrie did an amazing job of giving us a historical context and putting things into place so that we could have some background for me to start. In 2017, I retired from NAU after 25 years or so of working there. And I decided, because I had been a board member and the board president of the Southside Community Association, and I went over to the Murdoch to serve as an executive director for at least the next 3 to 5 years while we built capacity for the Southside Community Association. The city came to the Southside Community Association and asked us if we would be willing to work with them to develop a neighborhood plan similar to what happened in La Plaza Vejea. And we said, of course, absolutely, because we are concerned about our community and our neighborhood and the things that were happening with NAU and its growth. And so this was the right thing for us to do. And so basically what happened, I went out to the community, to the neighborhood. Mr. Soto was one of the first people that I contacted because he has so much history in the neighborhood, and he also has connections throughout, the community, and he has such great knowledge. And so, of course, we would not even think about doing a plan without asking for his input. And so we spent the summer of 2017 gathering the neighbors and convincing them and working with people to please come on board to help us to do this neighborhood plan. And the reason that we really had to work with the neighborhood was because there had been so many broken promises and people just did not trust the city. And so we worked with the city to build the trust of the community and the neighborhood. We did street corner conversations. We went knocking door to door on people's doors. We went to the churches. We did sessions at the Murdoch Community Center. We did everything that we could do to start to repair the trust that has been destroyed over the years. And the community came together and really supported this plan. And so we started to move forward with the plan. And we had just a mass amount of people who lived in the South Side, people who used to live in the South Side, people whose families were from the South Side, people who had just a love and a heart for the South Side. And I'm one of those people because I can't live in the South Side. But we have a heart for the community because it is such a neat community and it has so much history and value to the city. And so we came together to work on this neighborhood plan. We spent 2 years, maybe close to 3 years, working on this plan. A lot of time and effort and energy. And I often tell people that if the city had to pay us for the amount of time that we spent working on this plan, it would bankrupt the city probably. And if they and their staff, we're not, we're also talking about the amount of time that staff put into working on this plan. And so now we're to the point where, we've got this amazing plan. It won the best of plans in the United States, and then it went on to a international competition. and it won the best plan in the international category. So these are people, this organization works with communities all over the world to develop different kinds of plans and events and to get community involved. And so Flagstaff, this little sleepy town that sits on the top of a mountain, has won an international plan. And so people from around the world, as far as Australia, know about Flagstaff and the work that we've done. And so we're all really very proud of that. Unfortunately, we found out just recently that part of the plan that we thought we were going to be able to implement right away, excuse me, is now getting some pushback. And so let me just kind of set the stage. Part of the group that worked with us on this plan was the NAPTA, so it's the transit system in Flagstaff. And they are building a downtown connection center, which is a place where the buses can come through, people can transfer there, they can have a facility for the drivers and for the staff to work. And then they were going to put in a civic space because, as Dr. Guthrie said, there is not any open space or civic space or park space in the South Side. The city decided, whenever they decided years ago, that in order to have a park, you had to have 5 acres. Well, there are not 5 acres in the South Side anywhere. And so this was an answer to that problem, is because you know that when you have a gathering space, you build community. You bring people together to support one another and to learn about different cultures, different people. And so the civic space, as part of the downtown connection, was the answer to that problem. And we were all very happy. And the NAPTA organization received a very large, substantial grant to do this kind of work. The property that they want to use is a city property. It does belong to the city. However, the funds belong to NAPTA. And we found out that the city has some concerns, or some staff in the city has some concerns about taking away 93 parking spaces in the downtown or near the tracks on the South Side. This is mostly, from what I understand, coming from business owners. And I'm just going to be very direct right here. Again, there's a group of folks who operate businesses or whatever on the north side of the tracks, impacting what happens on the south side of the tracks. And so it is more important for them at this point to have those 93 parking spaces, which, by the way, is not going to solve the parking issue in Flagstaff downtown area. And so, but it is more important to say, okay, you need to wait again, 10 years, maybe. And we're going to maybe come back and address civic space in the South Side. But right now, we think that those 93 parking spaces is more important than a space to bring community together, to have festivals. People can come and sit and watch, the trains go by, or to watch the buses. My son and I, when we first moved here, he was a train enthusiast and still is. And we would go and stand by the tracks and watch the trains because that was of interest to him. And so, but it didn't provide us a space to go and sit and enjoy, the outdoors, because Flagstaff really has, great weather most of the year, from probably, early spring until late fall. And so this space would provide an opportunity to bring people together and to gather. And as Dr. Guthrie mentioned earlier, we used to have festivals on the South Side. We used to have community spaces. The churches provided a lot of that socialization. And now, because the populations have, dwindled and congregations have dwindled, they don't provide the same kind of activities that they used to provide. At the Murdoch Center, we have taken on some of that role, But again, the space is small, and it's not really, it doesn't, we can't gather in that space as appropriately as we could in other spaces. Now, the Downtown Connection Center civic space, contrary to what people might think, it is not, and I repeat, it is not only for different ethnic groups. It would be a space that could be used by everyone, but it would definitely be a space where perhaps the traditional or the annual Juneteenth celebration that is, visited by people from all over the city and all over the state, that could be, perhaps a space where that program could move. There are Hispanic organizations that are having problems finding spaces, civic spaces to do some of their festivals. That could be another opportunity. Native American people who sometimes are able to go to the museum, but that's not always appropriate, and so that would be another space for them. There's all different kinds of organizations that could use that space. Similar to Heritage Square, we have that on the north side of the tracks. We have Wheeler Park on the north side of the tracks, and those spaces are used for festivals and events and activities. And so we have found out that now, again, as I said, there's those that want to put that activity or that part of the plan on hold. And the comment, from what I understand, is that we'll come back and look at it maybe in 10 years. Well, what happens in 10 years is that, first of all, the council will change. That promise that you made now is not going to be adhered to or taken up in 10 years. Just like promises that have been made in other years that still haven't gotten the support that it needs. Some parts of Southside still does not have sidewalks, and so that was a promise that was made. So again, we have broken promises. And so I think maybe I will stop right there, and then we can, if Mr. Soto wants to talk a little bit about issues that he sees with this broken promise again, or if you have more questions, and then we can go from there. Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah, I want to make sure we come back to some of that conversation about this particular broken promise and what that looks like, where that change came from. But before we go there, I want to go to the Sotos and ask if they can give us a little bit of that historical context. I'd like to ask you guys if you can give us some perspective, given your long history of engagement in the South Side and fighting to protect the rights of underrepresented communities and minority groups within the South Side. What has that history looked like for you? And if you can just give us a couple instances of that engagement, just take a couple minutes to tell us what that was like for you.
The South Side has always been sore on the North Side, because it was more highly developable. More people wanted to move to the South Side but couldn't do it because the city controlled the monetary value, and they controlled the banks that would allow everybody to see if they could get a loan on the South Side. They wouldn't allow it. They never did allow it. All the banks would refuse you because it was underdeveloped, and it wasn't because of the rearward flag at the beginning. At the beginning was because they wanted the South Side. There was an area between where the football field is, that used to be a park for the South Side, but it was taken away when Dolan and Chambers decided to get that land and give it to the state to create NAU more, to move the football field, because they moved the football field from where the science building was to there. So that didn't allow anybody else to do anything in the park that they needed. Anywhere else, they had areas that they could have been developed, They could have developed it when the sawmill was there, but they wouldn't allow that because at that time there was a lot of political that they wanted that to be developed for other businesses, and they never wanted to allow the South Side to move in with any type of parks or anything else. So when they started doing it, we complained about the area right behind where they wanted to put a housing development, low-cost housing, and they said, no, you can't have it because it belongs to the city, and they want to do low-cost housing. Well, that shot that one. Then they went under the bridge, which would be fine. But then they said, well, we can't give you that now, I guess, until later, but we can sure maybe give you the one on the just south of the tracks. Well, it's always been to give this or give that, but it's always broken promises from all the cities. The city has been nothing but a sore thumb for the South Side. They don't want it developed because they want it, when they wanted to develop, like a lot of the buildings that have come in, is because of money. And if you're the right person at the right time, then you can come in there and buy. And they'll help you more or less move people in or move people out. But they will not help anybody in the South Side that wanted to develop the South Side. So, you know, the history of Flagstaff has always been negative toward the South Side. It's always been develop the North Side, or even now you can look at the North Side and it's nothing but shambles. Everybody's out of the neighborhoods. They cleared all the neighborhoods out on the North Side, shoved those people out into the outlying areas. You go anywhere in the North Side and you find very few people living in the North Side. You won't find people that lived there many, many years ago. And that's the reason that they've never been able to do anything. And it's always been political. It's always been he who has the money. And the river was originally moved for political reasons. It wasn't there originally. And the city and the people that ran the city are the ones that built the river flag. Now they got to put it back where it should be. It should have been there all along and everything would have been okay, but it's not. And now they don't know which way to go, so now they want to develop it. And it's just been one problem after another. And this is like Highway 180. They had a chance to fix it. They turned it down. They turned around. The government said, you can't have this for another 30, 40 years. It's the same way, but when they were building the freeway, Flagstaff said, no, we want people to come in through this. All they had was the road at the Walnut Canyon and the one at A1 Mountain. That's how they wanted the traffic to come through Flagstaff. Then they lost out on all the different bits in there. So there's a lot of history there where the city just turned around, and it's all been political on the upper end, never on the lower end.
Yeah, and most of those promises have been, most of those issues like with the highway and 180 have been driven by the Downtown Business Alliance and businesses on the north side of the tracks. They're the ones that are driving it and rejecting most of these proposals to bring in additional revenue or to build out infrastructure into the South Side. I mean, especially with growing up with my father and my grandfather in the South Side and understanding business dealings there, the roads, the construction of roads that went into the South Side, the citizens of the South Side had to give up property and put restrictions on their land. Most of them even lost their personal property just to build the roads into the South Side, which city took over and sold that to individuals from the North Side. There's even the money that was set aside to do the sidewalks for the South Side, which most of them don't even have them. That money was used, that was federal money that was allotted to the South Side, and that was given to Sunnyside to build out their sidewalks. And we repurposed over there with the promise of giving sidewalks to the South Side, which still has not been done. I mean, currently there's just red markings on the asphalt where you can park to align so that they can build out their parking enforcement to combat issues with NAU. I mean, it's come to the point where everybody's dictating what's going on with South Side, whether it's NAU and their parking overflow issues, or North Side and their parking issues as well, so that they can keep driving revenue and business into the north side of the tracks. That's one of the issues that we're looking at investment-wise with some of the things that we're doing with our firm with Southside and focus on Southside.
When I redid Milton Road with the State Highway Department, I asked the wrong question to a couple of businessmen: is why don't they build Lone Tree Road? And I got threatened with being fired. They were going to talk to the governor to make sure that I stayed in my lane, because the businessmen from downtown, all of them, turned around and said, "You're cutting into our business. We don't want another road coming into Flagstaff. We prefer to just have Milton to where we make the money. You don't need to put this money someplace else. You don't need to send it east to Lone Tree Road, or to put one at Butler Interchange, or even 4th Street." That was turned around, and they says, "No way can we do that. We've already talked to the board of directors in the highway department, and they say they agree that they'll do what we want, not what anybody else wants." The businessmen downtown have controlled this city for many, many years, and a lot of revenue has been lost because of their own, well, I hate to say it, but it's because they weren't ahead of the times, and they were really behind, but they never allowed Milton Road to be. And every time we redid Milton Road, same way all the way from East Flag through Flagstaff, it was supposed to have been turned over to the city, and never did, for the simple reason that the city turned around and says, "We can't take care of it," which was a known fact, that they could never take care of a road in the city, especially Highway 66. And Highway 66 is basically owned by Santa Fe anyway, all the way from the underpass, all the way to the curve that goes around by, on the east side. Half of that road belongs to Santa Fe because it's all Santa Fe land. And the city's only got permission to be on it because of Santa Fe. And the reason I know that is because I had a fight with Santa Fe to get the lights and everything else put in the proper places.
So I mean, from understanding the business and the aspects, like I said, with my father and grandfather, is downtown business has run the decision making, has been behind the decision making on everything that goes in development of Southside, as well as just city overall. And operating from a basis of fear of losing revenue is what's driven them to do and put Flagstaff in the position it is now. Now you have where the roads are heavily congested throughout town, and just to the point to where individuals don't want to come into downtown. And the parking issues, they've had the opportunity to put in parking structures in the past, they refused them. So the position that Flagstaff's in now is solely based on the downtown business owners. I mean, some of the individuals, not to just badmouth individuals. My grandfather was business partner with some of those individuals, and they developed properties and did things. Majority of the time, he did it on his own, and he did it against their will. But it was his money and his operation. So,
thank you both. I want to take us back a little bit, and I know that everyone on this conversation was part of the development of the Southside Neighborhood Plan. So Dr. Guthrie, if you can give us some context of what exactly, first of all, is a neighborhood plan? What is the purpose of it? What was the work that went into the development of the Southside Neighborhood Plan? And then beyond that, what does it mean then for that plan to have been adopted, for the civic space to be included as part of that plan, and for it now to be a part that is being either set aside or asked to wait? And we're going to focus in after this question on just that idea of waiting and broken promises. So if you can just frame it for us.
Oh, thank you. And again, I just have to say, I really want to commend the Sotos and Miss Deb and yourself for pulling this together, because I've been here 13 years and I didn't know 1/10 of what I just heard from the Sotos. I always assumed the big bad wolf was the university, or maybe the city. But now it looks like it's much bigger than even my limited understanding. And again, 10 years is not that small, but I've never heard to the extent that Ramon and David have presented. And, you know, Deb and I have these conversations all the time. It is truly amazing and a complex issue that could be solved very easily. So to solve that complex issue requires a plan. And generally, when a city develops a development plan, it puts out posters, invites people to town halls to get input on the plan they are going to build by themselves. So they'll invite Deb in, you, the Sotos, and other people who are considered stakeholders, but it has been very unique. In this instance, what they said, we're not just going to invite you to hear what you have to say, we're going to invite you to help draft the themes and ideas and the logistics and everything else. So it was a big research project where you never really get to see the working parts, except for this one. And that's why it's an award-winning plan. It lets you see the different parts that go into a city. How does a community become part of a city? Not just a little collection of neighborhoods, not just the Soto's house or my house or your house, but what do we as neighborhood residents really mean to live together? Okay, community. Community is coming together in unity. So you can't just be side by side with somebody, but you actually engage with them. A city plan at its best will recognize those relationships. It won't just say you're a homeowner, so therefore you have a greater say than, say, a renter. It won't say because you're a business owner, you have more say than the homeowner or the renter. It won't just say because you are a politician, you have more say than the city, than the business, than the university. No, a city plan pulls in all the players. We'll call them stakeholders, but some people have bigger stakes than others, which is, you know, as you know, Khara, my big concern was we were sitting around the table and not everybody had the same stake. You, as a graduate of NAU and a relative newcomer, you had a different stake than, let's say, the business owner on South San Francisco. And they did throw their weight around, as you know. So a city plan, if it's done right, will say, okay, I'm going to listen to what Khara has to say. I'm going to listen to what Deb has to say and Mr. Soto, along with the business owners. And I do believe, in my heart of hearts, the Southside Neighborhood Plan did that better than any plan I have ever seen. And I lived in Boston, which had a monumental redevelopment plan that took many years. We did this in 2 years. That's relatively quick, Ms. Deb. We'd say it seemed to take forever, but 2 years is actually dramatically fast for a development plan of this size. So summing up, a city plan to develop a city usually involves officials coming to you and asking for your input and then going away and creating whatever the hell they wanted. Just speaking truth to power. This one said, we're not going to do that. We're going to invite you to be shareholders, not just stakeholders in this process. And because it was so engaged, because the city officials were so attentive and sensitive to this very difficult legacy of segregation, they said, you're right, we're going to do it differently this time. And it doesn't mean the South Side is going to stay the same racial composition or the old housing to new houses. We're not going to enshrine these 50-year-old houses that really need to be put away, but we're also not going to push people out of the way when we develop. We're going to make civic engagement part of it. We're going to make places where you can live, work, and play. We may not be able to bring back the schools, right? You won't see South Beaver resurrected or the Dunbar School, but you could have a cultural center for both of those areas. Why not? South Beaver should be a cultural center. And you could have festival sites at the Murdoch Center. Why not? It's perfect for that if you develop the land so you can do it. But as Miss Deb said, they're not 5 acres that you can do it. It's going to be half an acre here or a quarter acre there, or starting with the downtown connector, that will be the model for it. And so moving into the last part of your question, Khara, the civic space. I mean, it's a nice way to say that it's going to be a place where a lot of good things can happen. It's going to be like a church. It's going to be like a park. It's going to be like a museum. It's going to be like all these things that we have been waiting for so long. And again, I'm going to have to yield to Miss Deb because she was much more engaged directly with the city about why this plan has to take all those pieces and make them work. I was on the outside to say, stakeholders, some of us aren't stakeholders, but here's my voice. And Deb was like, we're going to take all that, Ricardo, and it will be okay because I trust the process. So here we're at this point where the process may be changing. And I hope I answered most of what you were trying to say. I just wanted to, again, yield to Miss Deb and to the Sotos and to yourself because you have seen the evolution from when they just had you sitting around the table to a printed project that actually was approved. And I still go back on that to say it was approved that there would be civic parking, excuse me, a civic location, a civic space, and it was not going to take away from any of the parking that was already there, but it wouldn't be sacrificed. It would not be sacrificed. That's my contribution for that discussion, if you will.
Ms. Deb, I'll turn to you for more on that same question.
Okay.
What was the anticipation of what this Southside Community Plan or neighborhood plan would do specifically for the neighborhood? What was the vision of what was happening in the development of that plan? And let's navigate a little bit into then what it means for this particular part of the plan to be getting set aside.
Well, let me just say, first of all, say that when you do a neighborhood plan, the plan is designed to protect the neighborhood.
And I'm sorry.
That's one of the purposes.
Ms. Deb, if you can pause for one moment, we're having a little bit of an issue with your audio. I think it might just need to catch up a little bit. So go ahead.
Okay. A neighborhood plan should protect the neighborhood. And that's what this plan was designed to do. It was also designed to bring back some community to the neighborhood. And this civic space was going to help to do that. Okay. The parking issue, whether that's the North Side's parking issue or NAU's parking issue, is not the responsibility of the South Side neighborhood to fix. So to take away a vital piece of the plan to fix another problem that really isn't the South Side's responsibility to fix is wrong. There's just no way around it. It's wrong. And it's not fair. One of my favorite sayings is that nobody walks away with all the marbles. Everybody gets a turn. Well, it's Southside's turn. They need to get some of the marbles in this game. And so by taking away that vital piece of the plan, tells us again that your needs and your concerns are not important, that someone else who has a louder voice gets to make that determination. And again, that's not right. It's not fair. So, I mean, I could, does that kind of answer the question? Do you want me to elaborate some more on that, or Mr. Soto can come in?
Yeah, I'd like to bring the Sotos back in because I want to talk about, in particular, that seemingly historic and constant call to the South Side to wait. That was a major thing that stood out in the stories that you were sharing about your engagement with the South Side, your knowledge of the history of what's happened within the South Side. So if you can talk a little bit more about those different times when the South Side has been asked to wait. What has been the rationale behind asking the South Side to wait? You talked about redistribution of funds that were allocated to the South Side to other neighborhoods instead. Now we're looking at a situation where the South Side is again being asked to wait in deference to the needs of either the North Side or NAU's parking needs, which have, as Ms. Deb said, nothing to do with the civic space. So if you can give us a little bit more of that history and what that has meant to you in particular to constantly be asked to wait.
Well, it's gone back. I mean, I'll jump in before my father does, but it goes back to what Dr. Guthrie was discussing is the red line. I mean, it's all gone back to the red line, the realignment with the Rio de Flag to increase that red line and that issue with the red line to solidify it. And it's gone back to that point of that. And it's mainly was put red in that red line area for betterment of the north side of the tracks. And so I can let my father discuss more about that, though.
There was a time there when the city condemned all the way from Highway 66 all the way to Franklin on the north and south, and all the way from Beaver Street all the way to San Francisco Street. They condemned all the homes. The only thing the people were really upset about was that they would all be moved out. However, the biggest problem was that they condemned one house that they didn't realize would stop the whole thing, and that was that they condemned the mayor's house. And that was Mr. Hutchison, who lived out on a ranch which a lot of people know who he was. When he came into town, we told him, because we lived next door to him, that his house was red tagged. He turned around and he says, "Who red tagged it?" We told him the city. They want us all out of here because they want the Babbitts to come and move down here, and the city would take over where the Babbitt property is to build a convention center. The next one was when they turned around and we asked, especially where I live, to be curb, gutter, sidewalks, sewer lines, water lines, which were almost 100 years old, to see if we could get it. The city decided, well, look, we're doing some renovation on Franklin and Ellery Street so we can get NAU up to par. So we're thinking that you can wait. Would you mind? We told them, well, do we got a choice? They says, no, you ain't got no choice. And that was by Mr. Babasi, who promised a lot but then didn't deliver nothing. When we quoted him after that, then he says, I don't remember. And so that took that out. But it's just like everything else. It's like I asked him, well, if I can spend $8 million on the River de Flag by the high school and grade school, why can't I do that to the south side? And they said, what do you mean? I says, I'm redoing the road that goes from the grade school and comes from the dam and goes up in front of the school, which is one of the main areas in there and then next to the city property. Why do I have to modernize that area? Put in 16 catch basins to catch the water in and bring it into the River de Flag and then take everybody out of the floodplain in that area. They said, well, you just do your job. You have nothing else. You belong to the city, and if you have a problem, we'll take it to the governor. I says, I have no problem. I just want to know what's going on, because I went to the city hall and I asked. And that was the answers I got from city hall.
And that specific contract that he's bringing up, it was from the Lisa Short Pond through the next to the city maintenance yard that's no longer there, through the high school and all the way to the city hall. That construction job was a federal and state job through which he operated through ADOT, and pulled that entire north side out of the floodplain.
And that's, like I say, it's always been whatever the north side wants. It's just like the dome. When there was 3 business partners that wanted to put in Civic Center, they wanted to put a convention center, they wanted to put in a football stadium, all where Safeway is, all in that area. At that time, it wasn't developed, and that's where Jack in the Box and all those are. They turn around, they went to the NAU and says, "Could you help us out?" And then they went to the city, and at that time, the mayor turned around, went with the college and said, "Hey, we'll build the dome, and we'll put those guys out of business, and we'll get that developed." That was a disaster because basically Flagstaff would have benefited greatly on that part as far as the convention center, a baseball stadium, a football stadium, and a basketball stadium. And those three people, there was four of them, and they all got shut down because they just didn't belong to the right person. They were not the right persons to do that. So the dome was built, and it was built 5 feet shorter than it should have been, because at that time, that dome was supposed to be able to house a baseball team, a football team, a basketball team, and was supposed to have a hockey team in there. And now what have you got? You got nothing but a big piece of dome there that doesn't serve hardly anybody, because now they want to build a basketball stadium and everything else. It's just, like I say, it's always been the benefit of certain individuals and people that tried to develop and bring better stuff into Flagstaff have been denied. And it's all been toward the south side. And that's, like they said, they finally managed to get all the people out of that area, which they call the Chantes. And they kicked them all out, and that was, they moved them up. That's when they decided to close the sawmill and chase everybody out of that area so they could develop it into businesses that basically, like I say, it was individuals. And the city council and all that said, this is the way it's going to be, and that's the way it was.
Yeah, I mean, it goes to even to further point. I mean, being NAU, I mean, when did the South Side approve changing South San Francisco to Lumberjack Way? I mean, as well as the one-way streets on the South Side. I see the benefit for downtown area, the downtown, but not for the South Side. I mean, one way in and one way out, South Side is not beneficial to the South Side residents.
Let's talk about that because I think it's pointing us to a larger and bigger issue that people need to be aware of. You have the rerouting of streets through the South Side that aim people into the businesses in the North and draw business away, in effect, from the South Side community. You have the rerouting of the Rio through this community, and Dr. Guthrie talked about the impact of that and how it impacted the people who lived there eventually, even though it wasn't really something that they, I think at the very least, you could say they didn't put much thought into how it would impact the people of the South Side community because they weren't at the table and part of that conversation. During this whole conversation, my mind keeps going back to the Buffalo Soldier Museum, which was taken away and promised that it would come back. The community was asked to wait for that to come back, and that has never happened. And now we're seeing, again, this call for the Civic Center or area that was promised as part of the Southside Community Plan. Now that has changed to, well, maybe in 10 years we can do this. So I guess the question that I have with all of that is, what does it mean today to see this conversation as it has historically happened, as it's happening now, and what it means for the future of the South Side and Flagstaff, to have these moments where either the people of the South Side are not invited to the table, or they are brought to the table, given assurances of their fair share of the table, and then essentially sent to the back of the line to wait again for years and decades. Is this a legacy of systemic segregation? Is it a lack of communication and community consideration? Is it a combination of both, or is it something else altogether? I'll start with Dr. Guthrie and then Ms. Deb and the Sotos.
Oh, thank you, Khara, for beautifully laying that out. I'll just try to keep it to less than a minute here. Segregation as a social policy and as a legal policy. The social policy we'd call de facto. It's a fact of how we act. The legal factor, we'd say de jure. There's laws that put it in place. Flagstaff falls in the middle. It had both. They had a rule of 10. If you had 10 or more Mexicanos or 10 or more Black folks or 10 or more Indians, you had to make a school for them. And so they moved them out of the basement, yes, out of the basement of the main school and walked them down to South Beaver or set up the Dunbar School. These were two segregated schools built for the wrong reason, but they created a powerful cultural entity for Mexicanos, Hispanos, and for Black folks. Native Americans sort of stuck in between there. And that's part of the history. So the legacy of segregation is we will discriminate against you and not provide you the resources so that the city and everybody else can have what you should have been getting. This is the truth. It didn't mean you had to be racially averted or a Ku Klux Klan member. It just meant we don't pay for Mexicans. We don't pay for Black people. We don't pay for Indians. You're just going to do the work for us and be happy with that. And we will take the resources that your tax dollars are paying and we'll give that to the banks. We'll give that to landowners. We'll give it to whites. This is the fact. Now, Flagstaff only had like 15,000 people before World War II. And so you're saying, well, it was a small scale. There were many ways to get out of it. That's all true. There are many things you could do in a Flagstaff that you could never do in Alabama, Mississippi, or Louisiana. You'd be lynched. But here, you could own your home. You could chop wood. You could stay out of harm's way by living in the South Side with no gutters, with no sidewalk, with no proper drainage, on and on and on. This is exactly what the Sotos have been saying, and we know that part of the story. But what we don't know is why. Why would we still do this in 2021? Why would we say wait again like we did back in the 1940s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s? Why would we do that? And it is not an easy answer to say it's racism. It's more like that's the way we've always done it. That's the way we're going to keep doing it. And it's too bad you got in the way because this town is not built for you. We're glad you're here. But when it comes down to it, you know, as David was saying, there's too much money to be made. And so you can wait. And so I do want to say that is part of the rationale that it's better for the city to continue discriminating against you so that the existing owners can get more. And what we're saying is it's time to stop that. And I'll leave it there. Segregation has always been not just a matter of social custom, it's been about a matter of social law. And the law says we're going to build what we need to build. And when we're done doing that, maybe there'll be some left over for you. Segregation has always been a moneymaker for the powers that be, whether they were Black, whether they were Hispanic, whether they were Indians, etc. It has always been to keep the power system firmly in control of those who own it. And again, I'm not saying that's a black-white thing. I'm just saying that is how it's worked in Flagstaff and most cities around the country because of that legacy. And I know Deb has more stories to tell about Milwaukee and elsewhere. She escaped the Midwest to come out here. So I just want to put my hats off to all you who, like Deb, who've tried to do this and turn things around because it takes a lot of guts. Go ahead.
Yeah, I want to, before going to Ms. Deb and then to the Sotos to answer that same question, I just want to quickly read some comments from the chat because we've had a community member, Mr. Dennis Chavez, who has been participating actively through this conversation. And there are two comments from him that I want to read. The first is the most recent, where he just stated, why was Sinagua High School built? To keep whites away from minorities. And earlier in the conversation, he noted that he said, we own the lot at the end of O'Leary and want to put a sign honoring the Southside sawmill workers. We asked the city for the easement and were approved by the planning and zoning and rejected by the city. Our neighbors have illegally used the easement on the same street. So just further examples of the issue being discussed here. And so I'll turn it over to you, Ms. Deb, to just talk about, what it means, what it represents for not only the South Side, but for the city of Flagstaff as a whole, and just any of your other thoughts on that.
Yeah, I can address, I think, all of those issues. First of all, for those people who may not know, I served as the Flagstaff Unified School District Board President when we closed Sanawa. We did that because it was, at the time, it was the right thing to do. Because as everybody remembers, that was the time we were having a really bad economic downturn and lots of issues were happening. And as the board president, I got to facilitate community meetings where we brought people, all the parents could come in, they could talk to us. And I specifically remember neighbors, colleagues that I thought were, colleagues of mine, saying that we built that school so our kids didn't have to go to school with those kids. And I was shocked that I would hear that in that 2009, 8, 9, 10. And people were not ashamed to stand up to the mic in public and make those comments. That's not all of Flagstaff, but that's the power piece of Flagstaff. That's the privilege piece of Flagstaff that says that this is what I want and you don't matter because I'm privileged and my kids or my business or whatever is more important than yours. Luckily, there were 3 of us on that school board that could make a decision that was best for all of our kids, all of the kids. And so we made that decision to close that school at that time. And we closed a couple other elementary schools. And still people have, concerns about that. But that right there showed us that there are pieces of our community who really still feel that their needs and what they want are more important than what anyone else needs or wants. And that's probably going to always be like that. But I think that Southside is tired of waiting and we're tired of begging, the city, the residents in that community should be afforded the same opportunities that other areas of the city, have had for forever. And so, it's time for the city to stop. Those people who have been elected by all of us, their purpose is to advocate for all of us, not just for one segment of the population, but they should go back and think about the oath that they took. And it means that you make decisions that are best for the entire community and not a segment of the community. That's one of the first things. The next thing is that Southside continues to ask, and we ask so nicely, we're so nice. We ask, please give us this. And then you throw it back in our face and say, no, too bad, you didn't ask nice enough. We're not going to give it to you. And so I think that at some point people get tired of waiting, and tired of asking nicely, for things. And I don't want anybody to hear that as a threat, because it's not a threat. It's that, residents are not going to keep silence anymore. They're going to expect their council members to advocate for them. So when the city council says, we're going to come back in 10 years and we'll take care of you, they can't say that for the next city council. They can't bind a city council that will exist 10 years from now with something that they say right now. That council 10 years from now is not bound by that council that says, oh, maybe in 10 years. So they have to do what they can do now. They're in the seat now. They have to do that now. They don't need to wait for 10 years, or they don't need to push it off on another council. They need to be courageous and make the right decision. And just like those of us that sat on that school board at that time, we made a decision that was not popular with some people, but at the time it was the right thing to do. And so what I'm asking this council to do is to make the decision right now, because it is the right thing to do, and to be responsible council members, and to advocate for all of the citizens of Flagstaff, and not just for the people who you think have some power, or that you want to give them more power than other people. So I'll stop right there and let Mr. Soto and David Soto make their comments.
Yeah, and as we come back to you, to the Sotos, I want to read another comment from the chat from Kimberly Robinson, who said, pull yourself up by the bootstraps, but only in the manner allowed. And that seems to really point to so much of what you both have shared, both with your history of engagement and just your expansive knowledge of all of these different policies and things that have led to these different engagements with the South Side. So if you can talk both about, what leads to this, what's the cause of it, and what it means, but also just looking at, because you've talked so much about how the South Side has not been allowed at the table. And I'm wondering your thoughts on the issues that arise when people aren't invited to the table, when voices of communities are not empowered or enabled to speak into the community decisions that are impacting their lives. So what has that meant to you, and how would you like to see that change going forward?
Well, I mean, going forward, I'd like to see Southside have more representation. I think the issue with Southside not having the proper representation or a recognized voice more than anything on any of these boards is because Southside tends to be more outspoken. Residents from the Southside are outspoken. They don't tend to be involved in the backroom dealings or negotiations with anything, because we are more outspoken and we are looking to protect the South Side other than other areas. I mean, my business dealings have taken me to global operations, and that's completely opposite of what's going on in Flagstaff is the way that we operate. And that's one of the reasons why some of my businesses have not gone into Flagstaff, is because of issues with the city and the power players that are in the city. So we just choose to not operate there. We do have some operations that are in small investment firm that's operated out of the South Side, but it's very low key, and it's mainly focused with minorities based on, it is based off my grandfather's and my father's experiences, and that's the way we operate. I mean, it's similar to, going back to even another point, Khara, is the realignment of Butler. It took out a viable nightlife from the South Side, which, I mean, very few people understand. I mean, Latin Quarter was the founding facility for what is now called Sunrise Services. So, I mean, there's a whole story that's behind that has been lost, and it was started from the South Side and the Sawmill. So, I mean, people think that Sunrise Services was started by NAU and it's just a bad thing. It was never that. So, I mean, it's turned into that, but it's never started out that way. I mean, the representation's not there. It needs to be there with regards to it. My father, he served on boards when it was trying to work on designing what high schools are going to be closed, what high schools need to be realigned prior to Ms. Deb. And it was prior to them even deciding to do Sunol, build Sunol. And there was never to set up Sunol as a high school. But it fell in line with that because that's what those individuals wanted. And so, and it just seems like the South Side is a thoroughfare from NAU to the North Side. It's always been treated that way. And they'd rather, I mean, the master plan that was presented quite a few years ago that my father had seen was, and he can speak to it more in detail, was to have NAU from Butler, from Lone Tree on the east side to 66 Milton on the west side, and on the north side would have been Butler. That takes that, and that started a progression early in the 80s when I was younger, to where they started buying up the property of the South Side, and I mean, just eminent domain and take the property. And that's still happening. So it's slower now than it was before, but I mean, it's to just have that, and then have Butler be north of Butler to the tracks. That South Side region was to be acquired by the North Side and be considered North Side businesses.
To the elder, Mr. Soto, did you want to add on to that at all, or?
Yeah, like he said, the plan was the city would split. Butler would be the dividing line for the north to the south. I mean, from up north to the south, and then anything south of Butler would belong to NAU. And like the NAU said, well, when we get the money, we'll buy it. But other than that, we're going to allow other people to come in here and buy and build. Basically, they wanted different people to come in here and build. And that's how they built the convention center, the brewery, and all that. That's because of they condemned all that property and they took it all the way to Beaver Street. And they kept buying out, and now they've owned quite a bit of property in the South Side. Basically, what they said, the reason they want that, and the main reason was access in and out of NAU. If you don't have access, you're dead. So they turn around and they projected all that, so they didn't allow nobody else, only certain individuals to come in here. And they tried that, and a lot of it they failed, but a lot of it they succeeded, and that's what's happening now. It's being built, but it's being built with certain student housing, and it's being built with those Airbnb homes, and that's all that's moving in there, because all the ones I've talked to that are building said, well, it took us a while to convince the city to give us the permit, but that we knew somebody, and like I say, they had the money and they convinced certain individuals to turn around and back them up and say, hey, let these guys build. And that's what's happening now in the South Side. And it just takes time. They'll get rid of all of us. I mean, we're down to about 25 people, original people from the South Side that are left. The rest have all been moved out, sold out, or whatever, it's come about. But it's going to be, I think, even the ones that are buying out are going to get pushed out sooner or later. They just don't realize that there's a certain amount of money that comes into Flagstaff, because the South Side will be valuable as long as it's there. The minute they move that floodplain out, you're going to see some prices skyrocket. And then they'll come in and hound the people. We already are on the South Side. They keep calling it, well, why don't you're not going to build anything, why don't you sell out? Well, that's not the way certain people do business, but they have bought out certain individuals. And hopefully, like I say, they want the rest of it. But it's going to be a while before they get it. And the Liberty flag is there. And like I say, I never knew segregation existed until I went to the South. I went to Fort Gordon, Georgia in the military, and that's when I found out what segregation was, because I lived amongst all the different nationalities, and we never thought there was segregation, except for the North Side. If you lived on the South Side, you stayed on the South Side, the minute you crossed the tracks, then it was a different world. It was there, and we could live with it. And
I mean, and the South Side had its own thriving community. My grandfather was Shomer, a Asturian from Spain, and immigrated. He worked the grapevine ranches and built, and was a founding member of the Wool Growers Association. But he built, once he retired, he became a land developer. But his focus was minorities, the Plaza Vieja, the South Side, and that's where he focused and contributed to a thriving community to build that community up, along with those other sheep herders that had retired to Flagstaff, and built up the South Side to a thriving community against the will, and working outside within the bounds of the red line, but outside of the mainstream. And so, that's the way we've always operated. So.
We also had about 10 families that were from Sweden. They were Swedes. A lot of them were loggers. They did the logging industry. So, and the one father, he was the cobbler for the South Side. So we didn't have to go to the North Side to get our shoes cobbled. So that was one of the benefits that we had, is that he was very generous. And like I said, there was no segregation. In other words, everybody took their shoes there. So
I want to go back to something that, because what you're sharing there, just about the lack of apparent segregation because of how integrated the Southside community historically has been. It takes me back to something that Dr. Guthrie, you pointed out, that historically the South Side has been very integrated and inviting for all people to come in, where elsewhere that has not been the case within the community. And so I want to turn it back over to you to talk about that. And I know that you had something else to share just about the housing and Plaza Vieja as well.
Yes, thank you. And again, this is a very interesting concept. Is segregation that you've decided to live somewhere or you've been forced to live there? Now, most people will say, well, you didn't have to stop in Flagstaff, you could have kept going. But the reality was those Black lumberjacks and those Mexicano lumberjacks and the Native Americans, they needed that work and they needed that freedom. And when they got to the area where the work was, it was okay for them to live in the South Side because it was within walking distance of the lumber mill. It was in walking distance of the restaurants, of the hotels, and the train stops. So I think the common misconception is, well, you all want to be in Los Chantes because you all want to be with each other. That may be true. Of course, I want to live with mi patrones, mi hijos, and my aunts and uncles. Of course. As a Black person, I want to go to the same church that my people who came from Louisiana, they couldn't go to the Catholic church, we'll go to the Kojic church, or we'll go to the Baptist church instead, as long as I can do that and worship in peace. Now, that's a very different concept when you're told if you go north, you're going to be kicked out or lynched or hurt, okay? And people do know this. If they tried to go into other neighborhoods where they were not wanted, they were set upon and they were assaulted. Now, I say the Flagstaff area allowed Chinese. We haven't even talked about the Chinese, but there were laundromats that Mr. Wong or Young and Yi, Mr. Yi, would hire Latinos and Blacks and whites because a neighborhood allows for entries or people to come in, but doesn't allow them to move out. That's still segregation. That's a legal stricture. If you don't have a loan to build a house, that's discrimination and segregation as well. That's what the redlining is. Now, of course, again, we want to build strong communities. We want to be inside the same churches, schools, and whatnot. We do want that. We do want our neighborhood schools. And because of segregation, that would mean there'd be largely Latino or largely Black population at Dunbar and South Beaver. But the reality was, if you had tried to go to the schools on the north side after 1920 or thereabouts, you simply weren't allowed. I think there's some people who were light skinned, they could pass for a little while, but once they found out that they were actually African Americans, they were set upon. And this is the hard part for most people to understand. If you come to an area and racism is part of the way the city does business, it seems natural. It seems natural. But what Mr. Bavasi did or other city managers or mayors might have done seemed natural to them until somebody stood up like Mr. Soto and said, no, I'm going to sell this plot of land to the missionary Baptists. I'm going to do it regardless of what you think. And they couldn't stop him because he was a private owner. I've heard this story from the Sotos before. So I just want to say this. There are some individuals who do heroic things like the Sotos did. And there are others who turned a blind eye because it was easier to do that. Was there a law that said you can't do that? No, there wasn't. But it was custom. It was understood. Don't sell any land to black folks. And you know, those who were, I think the Babbitts were heroic in many ways because they gave land for the Our Lady of Guadalupe. I think it was the Babbitts, and other areas that were in the South Side. You can correct me, Mr. Soto, if I'm wrong, but I did hear that they would set aside land because they did want the neighborhood to survive, and they did care about the people who lived there. And I don't know if that's just a short snippet, I think, Khara, that we want to talk about the difference between de jure and de facto segregation. It is still a social custom that enforces discrimination. And again, people don't understand that when we try to integrate, that doesn't mean that segregation went away. No, it just meant instead of going to South Beaver, I got to go to another school, or to Dunbar, once it's closed, I got to go to another school. But I still had to come back home to the South Side. I still couldn't live north of the tracks. Anyway, it's a very small town. It has a very storied history, and I'm glad we're starting to tell some of it because the mindset still exists that you don't deserve a park. You don't deserve your own school. You don't deserve a baseball field, football field, and a basketball field that we had promised to you because we decided to do something else with it. And again, it's a lot of history we're trying to cover in a very short time. I'm so glad we take a little bit of this at a time to try to get through it. So go ahead.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I want to close us out with one last question that I'd like to give each person the chance to answer. And it's going back to the motto, I want to call it a call to action that was part of your presentation, Dr. Guthrie. And it was the idea of working to turn segregation into congregation. So the question I'd like to ask each of you is, what does it mean to embrace the work of turning segregation into congregation? What does that look like, or what does it need to look like within the community of the South Side and within Flagstaff as a whole today? So I'll start with Dr. Guthrie, go to the Sotos, and then Ms. Deb.
I won't take up much time. I'll leave it for my partners in this story. But what it means is you use your cultural history and your ethnic background to build strength among yourselves, so that then you could use that model. So just like David and his father and his grandfather built businesses that were modeled off of the things that they knew and the things they could share, that could be a worldwide business if Flagstaff recognized it. So as Ms. Deb was trying to build the Murdoch Center as a cultural center, she's starting with the people that she know come to Murdoch or had used to work around there. And she might go all the way to Brandon Homes, but they all feel a part of what the Murdoch tradition is about. I'm coming from California. I know nothing about Flagstaff, but I go straight to the Murdoch Center because I see things happening that are part of my cultural heritage, history, and knowledge as an African American or an Afro-Latino, if you wanted to go that far. My mother's from Guatemala, and so she never felt like a immigrant. She just felt she would carry her culture and her history to her kids, Just like my father came from Kentucky, he brought his culture and his history to his kids. So we can be proud of having both cultures and both histories. And when I share that, then other people can say, oh, that's what it means to be American. So that's what I'm trying to say. I know that's not always an easy concept for people, but we're all part of this beloved community. We're all part of the human race, but we are all seen for who we are: Black, Latino, Indigenous, etc. And there's nothing wrong with that, except when you try to use that against me. So turning segregation into congregation starts with saying, I am, oh no, we are, so therefore we are. I just want to give space for Deb and them to talk, but that's a Ubuntu concept. I am a person because other people taught me how to be a person. I didn't do it by myself. Ubuntu, it's for all of us.
Thank you.
It's just like you take San Francisco Street, which was very popular back in the old days. And the only one that's really taken advantage of it is the one that's got that tourist home, because they kind of rebuilt the high life back in the back and put that culture back in there. Other than that, all the rest of the buildings that are coming up in there totally just destroyed the neighborhood. They don't even fit in because of their design. They don't fit in there because they're becoming A and B homes for tourists to come, and they'll never know what they're doing on Frisco Street. They don't understand the whole thing behind it, and basically it's just there, and it's a tea house or something. I don't know what it's built, but all the other ones that are coming in are totally taking everything away from what originally was there. So they haven't embraced the southern part of the south side to build in what everybody else had in there. So other than that, it's they just need to come in there and say, well, what's here and what was here. But like I say, if sooner or later, the people that own there are passing away. Like I said, there's only 27 left. And as soon as those 27 are gone, everything else is being sold out. So I'll leave it at that, and we'll just build more and more student housing or different homes in there. And you take the building that was a charro, it's there, but it hasn't been used for what originally it was. And so it's taking that away. And the rest of it's moving up to where it becomes more of a hangout for a bunch of NAU students to party and tear up the neighborhood.
Yeah, and I mean, to Dr. Guthrie's point, I've experienced racism from both sides. I mean, I'm very light-skinned, blue-eyed. Most people think that I'm white. I'm a Spaniard, through and through. True. I've taken along culturally everything that I've learned growing up. I mean, and as for a global business, we do have global businesses. The business that we operate, the family office investment firm out of Flagstaff that we operate, has offices in Spain as well as in Latin America. The venture capital firm Azellera, which is based off the Basque word of accelerate, is also an international firm. I mean, we embrace the internationality and the global infrastructure of investments, working and push forward the whole thing with sustainability and the issues with climate, as well as minorities, and wanting to push that forward. So we've experienced both sides of it. My dad has as well. I mean, we're both light-skinned. We know that within the white community or some communities, we don't fit in because of our last name. But then we also know that we're segregated against in some of the Hispanic communities and minority communities because of our light skin. So we've experienced it both. But we operate and push forward with our mission that we have, and that's the one that my grandfather started. So,
Thank you. Yeah, just to bring us, to a close, the phrase that comes to mind is that Southside is sick and tired of being sick and tired. And we're asking the city to keep its broken promises. That don't break your promise. We're asking the city council members to step up to the plate and be courageous. There have been promises from the Rio de Flag all the way to the Civic Center space, the downtown Civic space, that have been broken. And we're still waiting for those promises to be kept. And so if the community has heard what we've been saying on this broadcast tonight, if you agree that all communities should be treated equally and fairly, and that when you make a promise as a city official, that you should follow through with that. We're asking you to please make your sentiments known to the city council. Tomorrow, a group of us will be speaking during the public comment section. And so I'm asking people to please contact the city council, participate in public participation section. It's item number 5 on the agenda. All you need to do is send an email to publiccomment@flagstaffaz.gov. Give them your name, your phone number, and the item number, which is item number 5 on the agenda, and you have 3 minutes. And so we want them to hear from the citizens of Flagstaff that we expect our city council representatives to be truthful to their word. And if you make a promise, then you need to follow through on that promise. And so with that being said, I think that's all I need to say about that. So again, it's public comment at flagstaffaz.gov. And the meeting starts at 3:00. And so if you are in support of this downtown civic space, then please join us during the public comment tomorrow.
Thank you. And thank you all. I want to thank the Sotos for just all of your comments this evening, the history, the stories, the background, and all of the knowledge that you both shared with us this evening. To Miss Deb, as always, for your civic engagement, for being willing to be a voice for the Southside and fight for the Southside community in all the ways that you are and have and continue to do. And to Dr. Guthrie for the work that you're doing as part of this project and as part of your work with the Murdoch Center and memorializing the community through the mural, helping us to have that visual representation of the importance of this community and keeping the story alive in so many different ways. I definitely want to thank those who have stuck with us through this conversation. We've gone a little beyond the time that we had planned, but we just are blown away by your participation this evening. The comments are simply, I want to say, overflowing with insights and wonderful words from community members. And I want to close with one of those words, and then from a separate word from someone else. The first is Mr. Dennis Chavez, who has been engaging with us all along. One of the things that he said in the comments earlier was that we are tired as the Southside. We are tired, but will not threaten, but will always be seen as a threat. And that was just such a powerful message. And I think one that the community needs to hear in terms of how and why the Southside community is so engaged. And the final word that I want to close on is actually a poem. April is National Poetry Month. I am a poet, so of course I'm going to throw some poetry out there, but it is a poem by Langston Hughes called Harlem that I think speaks so strongly to what the Southside community is experiencing And again, a word that the community needs to hear in terms of what leads to this exhaustion with being asked to wait over and over again. And this poem just reads, "What happens to a dream deferred? Does it dry up like a raisin in the sun, or fester like a sore and then run? Does it stink like rotten meat, or crust and sugar over like a syrupy sweet? Maybe it just sags like a heavy load, or does it explode?" We thank you again for joining us. I want to pull up just our closing presentation. So we remind you that we will be back on Wednesday, April 7th, with a presentation, Black Trans Lives Matter, looking at the lived experience of a Black trans woman, the lived experience of a Black trans man, and why Black trans lives matter and how we get to that reality. Again, that will be on Wednesday, April 7th at 6 p.m. Local time. The Live Black experience is dedicated to fully engaging the community in all aspects of the Live Black experience and facilitating community dialogues regarding it that lead to mutual understanding, respect, and reconciliation. We invite you, as always, to take this survey, to engage with us, and to help us to continue to provide community with relevant and timely programming. And finally, if you enjoy the programming brought to you by the Murdoch Community Center, we ask you again to consider helping us continue that work with a monetary donation. This is the Southside Community Association is a nonprofit 501c3 organization, so you can make your contributions by going to the link on the slide or scanning the QR code on the screen. Again, we want to thank the community for joining us this evening. We want to share out the information for the Sotos organizations that are working within the South Side, so we will get that information to share with the community. And we thank you all for joining us again, and we hope that you will continue to join us in the future. With that, we say good night, be blessed, and be well.